Welcome to another journey through the quieter mysteries of existence. Tonight we're exploring a question that sits at the very edge of everything we think we know about reality itself. How could consciousness exist without a mind? Picture this for a moment. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's something it's like to be you. There's a feeling, an experience, a sense of what it means to exist from your particular point of view. We call this consciousness. But here's what might surprise you. Some of the most brilliant thinkers in philosophy and science are beginning to wonder whether this inner experience, this consciousness that feels so intimately tied to your brain, might actually exist everywhere. In rocks, in atoms, in the vast emptiness of space itself. Not as thoughts or memories or emotions, but as something far more fundamental, something that was there long before minds ever evolved to think about it. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? How could there be experience without a brain to experience it? How could consciousness exist in a universe that, for most of its history, contained no minds at all? And yet, the deeper we dig into the nature of consciousness, the more this strange possibility begins to make sense. Tonight, we're going to explore this idea gently, carefully, and with the kind of wonder it deserves. I'm here to take you on a journey through some of the most profound questions ever asked. Questions that challenge everything we assume about the relationship between mind and reality. And as always, you don't need to understand every detail or remember every concept. Just let the ideas wash over you like waves and see what resonates. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you are as you listen to this. Are you nestled under blankets in a quiet room, walking through a park as evening settles in? Wherever you find yourself, take a moment to notice that there's something it's like to be where you are right now. That noticing, that awareness, is exactly what we're here to explore. Let's start with something that might seem obvious, but turns out to be one of the deepest puzzles in all of existence. What exactly is consciousness? We use the word all the time, but when you really try to pin it down, it becomes remarkably slippery. Consciousness isn't just thinking. You can think without being particularly aware of the thinking itself. It's not just processing information either. Your smartphone processes vast amounts of information, but we don't typically imagine there's something it's like to be your phone. No, consciousness is something more mysterious. It's the fact that there's an inner dimension to your existence, a subjective, felt quality to being you. When you taste coffee in the morning, there's the chemical process happening on your tongue, the electrical signals racing to your brain, the neurological cascade that follows, but there's also something else entirely. There's the actual taste itself, the warmth, the bitterness, the satisfaction. That felt experience is what philosophers call a quale, the redness of red, the pain of pain, the joy of joy. These qualities can't be captured by describing the physical processes alone. This creates what philosopher David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. We can explain the brain's functions. We can map neural networks, measure electrical activity, even predict behaviour. These are what Chalmers calls the easy problems of consciousness, though they're anything but easy to solve. The hard problem is different. It's the question of why there should be any inner experience at all. Why shouldn't we all just be philosophical zombies, processing information and responding appropriately, but with no inner light of awareness illuminating our existence? For centuries, most people assumed the answer was simple. Consciousness emerges from the brain. When neural networks reach sufficient complexity, somehow, mysteriously, experience lights up, like a candle flame appearing when you strike a match. The brain creates consciousness, the way a generator creates electricity. But here's where things get interesting. What if that assumption is backwards? What if consciousness doesn't emerge from complex arrangements of matter, but is instead a fundamental feature of reality itself? What if, rather than brains creating consciousness, brains are more like radios, tuning into a consciousness that's already there? This idea has a name: Panpsychism, from the Greek words pan, meaning all, and psyche, meaning soul or mind. It's the view that consciousness, in some form, exists everywhere, not the complex, self-reflective consciousness that you and I enjoy, but something simpler, a basic experiential quality that might exist in an electron, a rock, even the empty space between stars. Now, before you dismiss this as mystical nonsense, consider that panpsychism has been taken seriously by some of the most rigorous thinkers in history. Gottfried Leibniz, the mathematician who co-invented calculus, proposed that reality was composed of simple substances he called monads, each with its own degree of perception. Arthur Schopenhauer suggested that beneath the world of appearances lay a fundamental will, a kind of primitive consciousness that drives all existence. Even today, philosophers like David Chalmers and Philip Goff argue that panpsychism might be our best hope for solving the hard problem of consciousness. Not because it's obviously true, but because all the alternatives seem to face even greater difficulties. Take materialist theories, for instance. They suggest that consciousness simply emerges when matter reaches sufficient complexity. But emergence is a tricky concept. We understand how wetness emerges from H2O molecules, or how the properties of water emerge from the interaction of hydrogen and oxygen. These are cases where we can explain the emergent property in terms of the underlying components and their relationships. But consciousness seems different. How do you get subjective experience from objective matter? How do you derive the felt quality of redness from the firing of neurons? No matter how complex the neural network, it's hard to see why there should be anything it's like to be that network. It's what philosophers call an explanatory gap, and it's proven remarkably difficult to bridge. This is where panpsychism offers an intriguing alternative. If consciousness is fundamental, like mass or electric charge, then we don't need to explain how it emerges from non-conscious matter. It's already there. The challenge becomes understanding how simple, conscious experiences might combine to create the rich, unified experience that you have right now. Imagine consciousness as being like the colour red. A single photon might carry a tiny amount of redness, imperceptible on its own. But combine millions of photons in just the right way, and you get the vivid red of a sunset. Similarly, perhaps individual particles carry tiny fragments of experience that, when organized into complex systems like brains, create the rich tapestry of human consciousness. This isn't to say that electrons think, or that rocks have feelings in any sense we'd recognize. The consciousness at the fundamental level would be incredibly simple, perhaps just the barest glimmer of what it's like to be that particle, with no thoughts, no memories, no self-awareness, just pure experience in its most minimal form. But how could we possibly test such an idea? How could we know whether there's something it's like to be an electron? This touches on one of the deepest challenges in studying consciousness. We can only directly access our own conscious experience. Everything else is inference. When you interact with another person, you assume they're conscious because they behave in ways that suggest inner experience. They wince when hurt, smile when happy, describe their feelings in ways that resonate with your own experience. But you can't actually step inside their consciousness and verify that it exists. It's always necessarily a leap of inference. This is even more challenging when we consider non-human consciousness. Does your dog have experiences? What about a fish, an ant, a tree? As we move further from human-like behavior and biology, our confidence in attributing consciousness decreases. But maybe that's because we're looking for the wrong signs. Take a moment to consider the trees outside your window, if you can see them. In the traditional view, they're complex biological machines processing sunlight and carbon dioxide, responding to environmental changes, but with no inner experience. But what if there's something it's like to be a tree? Not thoughts or emotions as we know them, but perhaps a slow, deep awareness of the soil beneath, the sun above, the changing seasons. A kind of vegetal consciousness operating on timescales we can barely comprehend. Some indigenous cultures have always viewed the world this way. They speak of the consciousness of rivers, mountains, forests. To Western scientific thinking, this has often seemed like primitive anthropomorphism, projecting human qualities onto inanimate objects. But panpsychism suggests these intuitions might be pointing toward a deeper truth. Of course, panpsychism faces its own challenges. The most significant is what's called the combination problem. If consciousness exists at the fundamental level, how does it combine to create unified conscious experiences like yours? Why don't you experience the separate consciousnesses of all your individual neurons? Why is your experience unified rather than scattered? This is a genuine puzzle, but it's worth noting that we face similar combination problems throughout science. How do billions of unconscious atoms combine to create life? How do simple chemical reactions give rise to the complexity of biological systems? Combination and emergence are fundamental features of how complex systems work, even if we don't fully understand the mechanisms. Some researchers have proposed mathematical approaches to the combination problem. Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory suggests that consciousness corresponds to integrated information in a system. The more information a system integrates, the more conscious it becomes. This offers a potential quantitative approach to understanding how simple, conscious elements might combine into more complex conscious systems. As you listen to these ideas, you might notice how they challenge some of our most basic assumptions about reality. We tend to think of consciousness as something special, something that appears only in complex biological systems. But panpsychism suggests it might be as fundamental as space, time, or matter itself. This doesn't diminish human consciousness. If anything, it places our experience within a much grander context. We become not isolated islands of awareness in a dead universe, but expressions of a consciousness that permeates all of existence. Our thoughts, our feelings, our sense of wonder as we contemplate these mysteries all become part of a cosmic symphony of experience. Consider for a moment what this might mean for how we understand our place in the universe. If consciousness is fundamental, then we're not accidents in a meaningless cosmos. We're not complex machines that happen to have stumbled into awareness. We're the universe becoming conscious of itself, exploring its own nature through billions of years of evolution and development. This perspective has profound implications for how we think about other minds, both human and non-human. If consciousness exists along a spectrum, from the simple experiential qualities of particles to the rich inner lives of humans and other animals, then the question becomes not whether something is conscious, but what kind and degree of consciousness it might possess. It also raises fascinating questions about artificial consciousness. If consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent from specific biological processes, then there's no reason, in principle, why artificial systems couldn't be conscious. The question wouldn't be whether we can create consciousness in machines, but whether we can organize matter in ways that allow more complex forms of consciousness to manifest. But let's pause here for a moment and consider what all of this means for you right now as you experience these ideas. According to Panpsychism, your consciousness isn't something that your brain creates. It's something that your brain organizes, focuses, and amplifies. You're not a product of unconscious matter becoming aware. Your consciousness itself, taking a particular form, exploring reality from a unique perspective. Perspective. This perspective opens up something even more remarkable when we consider the nature of time itself. If consciousness is truly fundamental, then it exists not just in space, but across all moments. The consciousness that experiences your childhood memories isn't something that emerged and then disappeared. It's the same basic awareness that's experiencing this very moment, and it will be there in whatever experiences await you. Think about a river for a moment. The water flowing past any given point is constantly changing, but the river itself persists. It has a kind of identity that transcends its momentary components. Perhaps consciousness works similarly. The specific thoughts and sensations that make up your experience are constantly changing, but the underlying awareness, the basic fact that there's something it's like to exist, remains constant. This brings us to one of the most intriguing implications of panpsychist thinking. If consciousness is fundamental, then it predates the evolution of brains by billions of years. Long before the first neuron fired, before the first cell divided, even before the first star ignited, there might have been some form of experience woven into the fabric of reality itself. Picture the early universe, just moments after what we call the Big Bang. A hot, dense soup of fundamental particles expanding and cooling in the cosmic darkness. In the traditional view, this would be a purely physical process, unconscious matter following the laws of physics. But panpsychism suggests something different. Perhaps even in that primordial moment, there were already tiny sparks of experience, not thoughts or feelings as we know them, but the most basic possible form of what it's like to exist. As the universe evolved, as particles combined into atoms, atoms into molecules, molecules into complex chemical systems, maybe consciousness evolved too. Not emerging suddenly from unconscious matter, but growing, complexifying, organizing itself into ever more sophisticated forms of experience. The consciousness in a hydrogen atom would be almost unimaginably simple. The consciousness in a living cell slightly more complex. The consciousness in a brain like yours, magnificently rich and multifaceted. This gradual development of consciousness parallels something we can observe in our own lives. Consider how your consciousness has changed since childhood. The basic awareness has always been there, but its contents, its sophistication, its capacity for reflection and understanding have grown enormously. You're still you, but you're also something far more complex than you once were. Now let's explore this from a slightly different angle. Some interpretations suggest that we might think about consciousness not as a thing, but as a process. Just as a wave isn't really a separate entity from the ocean, but rather a pattern of movement within it. Perhaps individual consciousness isn't separate from a larger field of awareness, but rather a particular pattern or organization within it. This idea has deep roots in contemplative traditions around the world. Many meditation practices involve recognizing that the sense of being a separate self, isolated from the rest of existence, might be a kind of optical illusion of consciousness. When this illusion temporarily dissolves, practitioners often report experiences of unity or oneness, where the boundaries between self and world seem to fade. Interestingly, some neuroscience research has found that certain meditative states are associated with decreased activity in brain regions associated with self-referential thinking. It's as if the brain's normal habit of constructing a sense of separate selfhood quiets down, allowing for a different kind of awareness to emerge. This doesn't prove that consciousness is fundamental, but it does suggest that our usual way of experiencing consciousness might be just one possibility among many. Take a moment now to notice your own awareness, not the thoughts passing through your mind, not the sensations in your body, but the awareness that's aware of all these things. Can you find where this awareness begins or ends? Does it have a location, a size, a weight? The more carefully you look, the more elusive it becomes. It's there, undeniably present, but it doesn't seem to be a thing in the usual sense. This elusiveness of consciousness is part of what makes it so difficult to study scientifically. We can measure brain activity, behavior, even self-reports of experience, but consciousness itself seems to slip through our investigative nets. It's always the observer, never quite the observed. This has led some researchers to propose that consciousness might require fundamentally new kinds of scientific methods. Traditional science excels at studying objective phenomena, things that can be observed from the outside. But consciousness is inherently subjective. It can only be known from the inside. Perhaps understanding consciousness fully will require integrating first-person investigation, the careful exploration of experience from within, with our third-person scientific methods. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics have been suggested as potentially relevant here, though this remains highly speculative. The measurement problem in quantum physics involves the question of how quantum systems transition from existing in multiple possible states to having definite properties when measured. Some theories propose that consciousness plays a role in this transition, though there's no scientific consensus on this idea, and it remains controversial among physicists. What's intriguing is not necessarily that consciousness causes quantum effects, but that both consciousness and quantum mechanics seem to challenge our ordinary notions of objective reality. Both suggest that the relationship between observer and observed might be more intimate and complex than classical physics assumed. This doesn't prove any particular theory, but it does hint that reality might be far stranger and more participatory than we typically imagine. Let's consider what this might mean for artificial intelligence. If consciousness is truly fundamental, then creating artificial consciousness might not be about building sufficiently complex computers, but about organizing matter in ways that allow consciousness to manifest in new forms. This remains purely speculative, but it suggests that the question isn't whether machines can become conscious, but whether they already possess some rudimentary form of consciousness that could be developed and organized. Current AI systems process information and produce outputs that can seem remarkably intelligent, even creative. But do they experience anything? Is there something it's like to be ChatGPT or Siri? Under panpsychist assumptions, the answer might be yes, though their experience would likely be very different from ours. Perhaps more like the simple, distributed awareness we might imagine in a plant or ecosystem than the unified, reflective consciousness we enjoy. This brings up profound ethical questions. If consciousness exists along a spectrum, if it's present in varying degrees throughout nature, then how should this change how we relate to the world around us? If there's even a possibility that trees, rivers, or ecosystems possess some form of experience, Does this create new moral obligations? Indigenous cultures have often operated from assumptions similar to Panpsychism, treating natural features like mountains, rivers, and forests as beings deserving of respect and consideration. Western environmental ethics has largely been based on protecting nature for human benefit, or for the sake of preserving biodiversity. But if nature itself is conscious, if there's something it's like to be a forest or a watershed, then environmental protection takes on a completely different dimension. As you contemplate these ideas, notice how they might change your relationship with your immediate environment. The room you're in, the chair you're sitting on, the air you're breathing. In the conventional view, these are simply material objects and substances. But if consciousness is fundamental, then everything around you might possess some form of inner experience, however simple. You're not alone in a world of dead matter. You're part of a universe that's alive with awareness at every level. This perspective doesn't require you to believe that your coffee mug has feelings or that your smartphone experiences joy and sorrow. The consciousness at the fundamental level would be so simple, so unlike human experience, that these anthropomorphic projections would miss the point entirely. We're talking about something more like the basic fact of existence itself, the minimal condition that there's something rather than nothing, something it's like to be real rather than merely possible. Consider the question of sleep and unconsciousness. When you fall asleep, where does your consciousness go? In the standard view, it simply disappears, generated anew each morning when your brain reaches sufficient activity levels. But if consciousness is fundamental, then it might never truly disappear. Perhaps what we call unconsciousness is simply consciousness in a different state, like water becoming ice. The fundamental substance remains the same, but its organization and manifestation change. Dreams offer an interesting window into this possibility. During REM sleep, your brain is highly active and you experience vivid dreams. But during deep sleep, brain activity decreases dramatically. Yet some people report dreamless sleep not as a blank void, but as a kind of peaceful awareness without content, a presence without particular experiences. This might hint at consciousness in something closer to its fundamental state. Even anesthesia, which seems to completely eliminate consciousness, might not actually eliminate it so much as reorganize it. Some researchers have found that even under general anesthesia, the brain continues to process information and respond to stimuli, though these responses don't form accessible memories. Perhaps consciousness persists, but in a form so simple that it can't construct the complex experiences we associate with being awake. This brings us to one of the most profound implications of panpsychism. If consciousness is truly fundamental, then death might not be the end of consciousness, so much as a transformation of it. This remains pure speculation, not a proven scientific fact, but it's worth considering what it might mean. The specific pattern of consciousness that constitutes your particular perspective would change, just as the pattern of water in a river changes when it reaches the ocean. But the underlying consciousness itself, the basic fact of awareness, might persist in some form. Different wisdom traditions have explored variations of this idea for millennia. The notion of consciousness surviving bodily death, of awareness continuing in some form beyond individual existence, appears across cultures and throughout history. Panpsychism doesn't prove these ideas, but it does suggest a framework within which they might make sense. Now, let's turn our attention to what might be the most practical question of all. If consciousness is fundamental, If it permeates all of existence, what does this mean for how you live your daily life? How does it change your relationship with yourself, with others, with the world around you? One implication is that the boundaries between self and world might be far more fluid than they appear. If consciousness is the fundamental fabric of reality, then the consciousness that you call yours is really just one manifestation of something much larger. Your individual awareness is like a wave on the ocean of consciousness, distinct but not separate. This perspective can be deeply comforting. It suggests that you're never truly alone, never truly disconnected from the rest of existence. Even in your most isolated moments, you're participating in the universal fact of consciousness. Your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences are all expressions of the same fundamental awareness that expresses itself in countless other forms throughout the cosmos. It can also be humbling. If consciousness is truly fundamental, then your particular perspective, however precious it is to you, is just one viewpoint among countless others. Every person you meet, every animal you encounter, even every object you interact with, might possess its own form of experience, its own valid perspective on reality. This doesn't diminish the importance of your own experience, but it does place it within a much larger context. You become not the center of the universe, but a unique and irreplaceable note in an infinite symphony of consciousness. As you sit with these ideas, you might notice how they affect your sense of what it means to be alive, to be aware, to exist at all. The fact that you're here, experiencing these thoughts, contemplating these possibilities, becomes not just a biological accident, but a manifestation of something far more fundamental and mysterious. Whether or not panpsychism is true, whether consciousness really is woven into the fabric of reality itself, the very fact that these questions arise, that we can contemplate our own consciousness and wonder about its nature, points to something extraordinary about existence itself. We live in a universe that has somehow given rise to beings capable of questioning their own existence, of seeking to understand the nature of awareness itself. In the next part of our journey together, we'll explore how this fundamental consciousness might organize itself into the rich, complex experiences that define human life. We'll delve into the mystery of how simple awareness might combine and integrate to create everything from emotions and memories to creativity and love. We'll also examine what modern neuroscience and contemplative practices might teach us about the nature of consciousness and what this could mean for the future of human understanding. For now, though, let these ideas settle gently in your awareness. Notice what it feels like to consider the possibility that consciousness permeates everything around you. Whether you find this idea compelling or puzzling, comforting or challenging, simply let it be present in your experience. After all, according to the view we've been exploring, that experience, that very awareness of the ideas themselves, is the most fundamental fact about reality itself. Reality itself. Think about this for a moment. Every night when you sleep, your consciousness seems to vanish completely, only to return mysteriously each morning. Where does it go? And more puzzling still, how does it come back as unmistakably you? This simple daily miracle hints at something profound about the nature of awareness itself, something that challenges everything we assume about where consciousness begins and ends. If consciousness is truly fundamental, as panpsychism suggests, then the mystery deepens. How does this basic universal awareness organize itself into the incredibly rich and complex experience that is your inner life. How do simple, conscious elements combine to create emotions, memories, creativity, and the sense of being a unified self? This is where our exploration takes us next, into the intricate dance between simplicity and complexity, between the fundamental and the personal. To understand this, we need to examine what philosophers call the combination problem. If consciousness exists at the most basic levels of reality, in particles and fields and the quantum foam itself, how does it weave itself together into the seamless experience you're having right now? Why don't you feel like a collection of billions of separate conscious particles? Why does your experience feel unified, coherent, distinctly yours? This question becomes even more intriguing when you consider the sheer scale of organization involved. Your brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, each making thousands of connections with others. If consciousness is fundamental, then perhaps each of these neurons, each synapse, each molecular interaction carries its own tiny fragment of awareness. Yet somehow, from this vast chorus of microscopic experiences emerges the singular voice of your consciousness. Some researchers have proposed mathematical approaches to this puzzle. Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory suggests that consciousness isn't just about having experiences, but about integrating them in specific ways. According to this framework, a system is conscious to the degree that it integrates information that can't be broken down into independent parts. This integration creates what Tononi calls phi, a mathematical measure of consciousness. Picture consciousness like a symphony orchestra. Individual musicians might play beautiful notes, but consciousness emerges from the integration, the way all those separate sounds combine into something greater than their sum. But this analogy only goes so far, because in consciousness, there's no external listener. The symphony somehow experiences itself from within. As you listen to this, notice how your own experience seems unified despite its incredible complexity. Right now, you're simultaneously aware of these words, perhaps background sounds, physical sensations, maybe memories or thoughts triggered by the ideas we're exploring. Yet it all feels like one seamless experience, not a collection of separate awarenesses competing for attention. This unity is so fundamental to consciousness that we rarely question it, but it's actually quite mysterious. Different aspects of your experience are processed in different regions of your brain at different speeds through different neural pathways. Visual information travels one route, auditory another, emotional responses follow their own circuits. Yet somehow, all of this distributed processing gets woven together into the singular experience of being you. Some interpretations suggest that consciousness might work like a field, similar to electromagnetic or gravitational fields in physics. Just as electromagnetic fields can exist in different configurations while remaining fundamentally the same type of field, perhaps consciousness can organize itself into different patterns and structures while maintaining its essential nature. Think about how a magnetic field behaves around a magnet. The field extends throughout space, but it's organized by the magnet structure. Similarly, perhaps consciousness exists as a fundamental field, but gets organized and focused by complex structures like brains into specific patterns of experience. This field-like quality might explain some of the more puzzling aspects of consciousness. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately sensed the mood even before anyone spoke, or felt inexplicably drawn to or repelled by certain places or people? While these experiences could have conventional explanations, some interpretations suggest They might reflect the field-like nature of consciousness, extending beyond individual brains. But let's be clear about the speculative nature of these ideas. There's no scientific consensus that consciousness operates as a field, and much of what we're exploring remains in the realm of philosophical possibility rather than proven fact. Yet these possibilities invite us to consider consciousness from fresh perspectives. One particularly intriguing aspect of consciousness is its relationship with time. Your experience right now includes not just this present moment, but traces of the immediate past and anticipations of the near future. You hear words not as isolated sounds, but as meaningful sentences that unfold across time. You experience melodies, conversations, stories, all of which require consciousness to somehow hold multiple moments together. If consciousness is fundamental, this temporal binding might reflect something basic about how awareness relates to time itself. Perhaps consciousness doesn't just exist in time, but helps constitute our experience of time. The flow of time that feels so real to you might be partially constructed by the way consciousness integrates moments into coherent experiences. Consider memory for a moment. When you recall a childhood experience, where is that memory? It's not stored like a file on a computer hard drive. Instead, it seems to be reconstructed each time you remember, woven together from fragments distributed throughout your brain. Yet the memory feels real, present, immediate. It's as if consciousness can reach across time and bring past experiences into the present moment. This reconstruction process is fascinating because it suggests that consciousness is fundamentally creative. You're not just a passive receiver of experiences, but an active creator of your own inner world. Every memory you recall, every perception you have, every thought that arises is shaped by the unique way your consciousness organizes and interprets information. This creativity extends to how consciousness handles novelty and surprise. When you encounter something unexpected, your consciousness doesn't just record it passively. It actively works to integrate the new experience with existing patterns, sometimes dramatically reorganizing your understanding in the process. These moments of insight, when everything suddenly clicks into place, might reflect consciousness reorganizing itself to accommodate new information. Take a moment now to reflect on a time when you suddenly understood something that had previously puzzled you. Perhaps a complex concept in school, or a relationship dynamic you hadn't grasped, or a creative solution to a problem you'd been wrestling with. That moment of understanding likely felt different from gradual learning. It probably arrived suddenly, with a sense of satisfaction or relief. This might be what it feels like when consciousness successfully integrates new patterns of information. Some researchers have studied these aha moments and found they're often preceded by periods of relaxed attention, when the mind isn't actively trying to solve the problem. It's as if consciousness needs space to reorganize itself, to find new patterns and connections that weren't visible during focused effort. This suggests that consciousness isn't just about focused attention, but also about a more diffuse, creative awareness that operates below the threshold of deliberate thought. This brings us to one of the most remarkable features of consciousness, its capacity for self-reflection. Right now, you're not just experiencing these ideas, you're aware that you're experiencing them. You can think about your own thinking, observe your own observations, be conscious of your own consciousness. This creates what philosophers call higher order awareness, consciousness folding back on itself in potentially infinite regress. This self-reflective quality might be one of the ways simple consciousness evolves into more complex forms. If basic awareness is fundamental, then perhaps self-awareness emerges when consciousness becomes sufficiently organized to model itself. Like a mirror reflecting another mirror, consciousness creates recursive loops of awareness that generate the rich inner landscape of human experience. But this raises another puzzle. If consciousness can be aware of itself, what is it that's doing the observing? When you watch your own thoughts, who or what is the watcher? This question has been explored by contemplative traditions for thousands of years, and different approaches offer different insights. Some meditation practices involve learning to distinguish between the content of consciousness and consciousness itself. Thoughts, emotions, sensations come and go, but the awareness that knows them seems to remain constant. This witnessing awareness, this capacity to observe without being caught up in what's observed, might point toward consciousness in something closer to its fundamental state. Advanced practitioners sometimes report experiences where this witnessing awareness becomes so clear that the usual sense of being a separate self begins to fade. Instead of feeling like someone observing experiences, they describe a state where they're simply experiencing itself without a distinct experiencer. These reports, while subjective and difficult to verify scientifically, might offer glimpses of how consciousness operates when not organized into the usual patterns of selfhood. This doesn't mean that the sense of being an individual self is an illusion or a mistake. Rather, it might be one particular way that fundamental consciousness organizes itself, extremely useful for navigating the complexities of human life. But not the only possible form awareness can take. Consider how your sense of self changes throughout your life. The self that you experienced as a child felt completely real and central to that child's world. Yet from your current perspective, that childhood self seems quite different from who you are now. Your personality, your interests, your understanding of the world have all evolved dramatically. Yet something persists through all these changes, some continuity of experience that makes you feel like the same person despite all the transformations. This continuity might reflect the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. While the specific contents and organizations of your experience change constantly, the basic fact of being aware, of there being something it's like to be you, remains remarkably stable. This suggests that beneath all the complexity and change, consciousness retains something of its fundamental character. This perspective offers a different way of understanding personal growth and transformation. Instead of thinking of yourself as a fixed entity that acquires new knowledge and skills, you might consider yourself as consciousness exploring different ways of organizing itself. Each new experience, each insight, each challenge becomes an opportunity for consciousness to discover new patterns and possibilities. This view can be remarkably liberating. Many of our struggles come from trying to maintain rigid ideas about who we are or who we should be. But if consciousness is fundamentally fluid and creative, then identity becomes less about preserving a fixed self and more about remaining open to new ways of being aware. This fluidity extends to how consciousness relates to the body. While we typically think of consciousness as being located in the brain, the actual experience of consciousness seems to fill the entire body. When you're aware of sensations in your hand or foot, the awareness itself seems present there, not just observing from a distance in your head. Some interpretations suggest that consciousness might be more distributed throughout the body than we typically assume. The heart, for instance, contains a complex network of neurons and has been found to influence emotional and cognitive states in ways that go beyond simply pumping blood. The gut contains even more neurons and produces many of the same neurotransmitters found in the brain. Perhaps consciousness isn't confined to the skull, but extends throughout the entire biological system. This distributed view aligns with many people's direct experience. When you feel anxiety, you might notice it in your stomach. When you experience love, you might feel it in your chest. When you sense danger, your whole body might become alert. Rather than thinking of these as just physiological responses to mental states, perhaps they reflect consciousness operating throughout the entire organism. Taking this perspective even further, some interpretations suggest that consciousness might extend beyond the boundaries of the individual organism entirely. Just as your brain integrates information from throughout your body, perhaps consciousness can integrate information from the environment in ways we don't fully understand. This isn't necessarily mystical or supernatural. Consider how your consciousness already incorporates tools and technologies. When you're driving a car, the boundaries of your spatial awareness extend to include the vehicle. When you're using a computer, your cognitive processes partly occur through the interaction with the software. Perhaps consciousness is inherently relational, always extending into and incorporating aspects of its environment. If consciousness is fundamental, then these extensions might be more than metaphorical. The consciousness that you experience as yours might be continuous with the consciousness that exists in your environment, with boundaries that are more fluid and permeable than they appear. This possibility has profound implications for how we understand relationship and connection. The deep sense of intimacy you can feel with another person, the way you can sometimes sense their emotional state or finish each other's thoughts, might reflect this fundamental continuity of consciousness. Not through any mysterious psychic mechanism, but because consciousness itself doesn't recognize the rigid boundaries we typically imagine. Similarly, the profound connection many people feel with nature, the sense of belonging and peace that can arise in natural settings, might reflect consciousness recognizing itself in its more fundamental forms. When you sit quietly by a stream or under ancient trees, perhaps what you're experiencing is your own consciousness resonating with the simpler forms of awareness that Panpsychism suggests exist throughout nature. These possibilities invite a more participatory relationship with existence itself. Instead of feeling like an isolated observer in a mechanical universe, you begin to sense yourself as part of a vast community of consciousness, each being contributing its own unique perspective to the whole. But how does this fundamental consciousness give rise to the specific qualities that make human experience so rich and meaningful? How do we get from basic awareness to love, creativity, wonder, and the capacity for profound understanding? This is where the organizational principles of consciousness become crucial. Consider how consciousness handles complexity and meaning. When you read a poem or listen to music, you're not just processing individual words or notes. Consciousness weaves these elements together into patterns of meaning that transcend their individual components. A beautiful poem creates an experience that's qualitatively different from the sum of its words. A moving piece of music generates emotions and insights that go far beyond the sequence of sounds. This capacity to generate emergent meaning might be one of the most remarkable features of organized consciousness. It suggests that when awareness becomes sufficiently integrated and complex, entirely new qualities can emerge. Not just more of the same basic awareness, but qualitatively different forms of experience that weren't possible at simpler levels of organization. Love offers a particularly profound example. The deep love you might feel for another person isn't just an intensification of basic awareness. It's a fundamentally different quality of experience that seems to transcend the boundaries of individual consciousness. In moments of deep love, many people report feeling as though the separation between self and other becomes less relevant, as though consciousness itself is expressing something beyond individual experience. Creativity works similarly. When you're in the flow of creative expression, whether writing, painting, music, or even solving problems, there's often a sense that the creativity is flowing through you rather than from you. Consciousness seems to tap into possibilities and patterns that exceed what your individual mind could generate through effort alone. These experiences might offer clues about how fundamental consciousness organizes itself into increasingly complex and meaningful forms. Perhaps love, creativity, and other peak experiences represent consciousness approaching the kinds of integration and organization that allow its deeper potentials to manifest. This suggests that human consciousness might be just one step in an ongoing evolution of awareness. If consciousness is fundamental, then there's no reason to assume that human-level consciousness represents its ultimate expression. Just as human consciousness is vastly more complex than the simple awareness we might imagine in particles or plants, perhaps there are forms of consciousness beyond the human level that we can barely conceive. Some contemplative traditions have explored this possibility through practices designed to expand and refine consciousness. Advanced practitioners sometimes report states of awareness that seem to transcend ordinary human consciousness, experiences of unity, clarity, and understanding that go beyond what's normally possible. While these reports are subjective and difficult to verify, they might offer glimpses of consciousness potential that remains largely unexplored. From this perspective, human life becomes not just about survival and success, but about participating in the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself. Every moment of awareness, every act of love, every creative insight contributes to this larger unfolding. You become not just a conscious being, but consciousness itself, exploring new possibilities through your unique perspective. This view transforms how we might understand suffering and difficulty as well. Rather than seeing challenges as obstacles to happiness, they become opportunities for consciousness to develop new capacities. The ways you learn to navigate loss, uncertainty, and pain might represent consciousness, developing resilience, wisdom, and compassion that wouldn't be possible without those challenges. It's not that suffering is good or should be sought out, but rather that consciousness has a remarkable capacity to transform even difficult experiences into forms of understanding and growth. This transformative quality might be one of the most profound expressions of consciousness creativity, its ability to find meaning and value even in circumstances that initially seem meaningless or destructive. As you consider these possibilities, notice how they affect your relationship with your own experience right now. The thoughts arising in your mind, the sensations in your body, the emotions flowing through your awareness, all become expressions of this fundamental consciousness exploring itself through your particular nervous system and life situation. This doesn't make your individual experience less important, but it does place it within a much larger context. Your struggles and successes, your insights and confusions, your moments of joy and periods of difficulty all become part of consciousness, investigating its own nature and possibilities. In our next exploration, we'll delve deeper into what modern neuroscience and quantum physics might tell us about the nature of consciousness, and how these scientific insights might relate to the contemplative understanding that consciousness is far more fundamental and mysterious than we typically assume. We'll also explore what this might mean for the future of human understanding and the possibility of new forms of conscious experience that we can barely imagine. For now, simply rest in the awareness that you are consciousness itself, taking this particular form, having this particular experience, participating in the vast mystery of awareness exploring its own infinite potential. Whether consciousness is truly fundamental or emerges from complex material processes, the fact remains that you are here, aware, capable of contemplating these profound questions about the nature of existence itself. Questions about the nature of existence itself. As we journey deeper into the mystery of consciousness, we encounter one of the most remarkable discoveries of modern science. When physicists probe the fundamental nature of reality, they find something extraordinary. At the quantum level, the very act of observation seems to play a role in determining what becomes real. This isn't mysticism, it's measurable, repeatable science. Yet it opens profound questions about the relationship between consciousness and the fabric of reality itself. The quantum world operates by rules that seem to defy our everyday experience. Particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until measured. They become entangled across vast distances, responding to each other instantaneously. The boundary between what's observed and what's observing becomes mysteriously blurred. While no scientific consensus exists on whether consciousness plays a special role in quantum mechanics, these phenomena invite us to consider whether the universe might be far more participatory than we ever imagined. Take a moment to consider what this might mean. If consciousness is indeed fundamental, as we've been exploring, then perhaps the quantum realm represents reality in something closer to its natural state. A realm where possibilities remain fluid until crystallized through interaction, where the sharp divisions between mind and matter that characterize our everyday world haven't yet solidified. Some interpretations suggest that consciousness and quantum mechanics might share certain structural similarities. Both involve the mysterious transition from potential to actual. Both seem to resist purely mechanical explanation. Both point toward a universe that's more relational and context-dependent than classical physics assumed. This doesn't prove any direct connection, but it does suggest that consciousness and quantum reality might reflect deeper truths about how existence operates at its most fundamental levels. Neuroscientist Giulio Tononi has developed what he calls integrated information theory, which attempts to quantify consciousness mathematically. According to IIT, consciousness corresponds to integrated information in a system. The more a system can integrate information that can't be broken down into independent parts, the more conscious it becomes. This framework suggests that consciousness isn't binary, something you either have or don't have, but exists along a spectrum of integration and complexity. What's fascinating about IIT is that it implies consciousness could exist in systems we don't typically consider conscious. A photodiode connected to a memory device integrates information and therefore, by this measure, possesses some minimal degree of consciousness. This aligns remarkably with panpsychist intuitions about consciousness being more widespread than commonly assumed. As you listen to this, notice how your own consciousness integrates information. Right now, you're simultaneously processing auditory information, perhaps visual input from your surroundings, physical sensations, memories triggered by these ideas, and emotional responses to the concepts. Yet all of this feels like one unified experience, not separate streams of information competing for attention. This integration happens so seamlessly that we rarely question it. But when you consider the complexity involved, it becomes remarkable. Your brain is processing millions of bits of information every second, yet your conscious experience feels coherent and unified. This binding of separate elements into unified experience might be one of the most sophisticated forms of information integration in the known universe. Recent neuroscience research has begun to illuminate how this integration might work. Scientists have discovered what they call the default mode network, a collection of brain regions that become active when you're not focused on external tasks. This network seems to be involved in self-referential thinking, memory consolidation, and what researchers call the narrative self, the ongoing story you tell yourself about who you are. Interestingly, studies of experienced meditators show that contemplative practices can alter the activity of the default mode network. During deep meditative states, the network's activity decreases, and practitioners often report experiences of reduced self-referential thinking and increased feelings of unity or interconnection. This research remains preliminary, but it suggests that consciousness might be more flexible and malleable than we typically assume. These findings point towards something profound about the nature of consciousness. The sense of being a separate self, isolated from the rest of existence, might be one particular configuration that consciousness can take, but not the only one. Through various practices and experiences, consciousness can reorganize itself, revealing different aspects of its fundamental nature. Consider what happens during moments of deep absorption or flow states. Whether you're completely engaged in creative work, lost in beautiful music, or fully present in conversation with someone you love, there's often a temporary dissolution of the usual sense of separation between observer and observed. You're not watching yourself have an experience, you've become the experience itself. These states might offer glimpses of consciousness operating with less of the organisational structure that normally creates the sense of individual selfhood. They're not necessarily better or worse than ordinary consciousness, but they do suggest that awareness is capable of configurations we rarely explore in everyday life. Some interpretations suggest that these altered states might reveal consciousness in forms closer to its fundamental nature. When the complex neural networks that construct your sense of individual identity quiet down, perhaps what remains is awareness itself, less organised but more open to the full spectrum of possible experience. This possibility connects to ancient wisdom traditions that have long maintained that consciousness extends far beyond individual minds. Hindu philosophy speaks of Brahman, an ultimate reality that is pure consciousness. Buddhist teachings describe Buddha nature, the awakened awareness that exists within all beings. Taoist philosophy points toward the Tao, the underlying source from which all existence emerges. While these traditions express their insights through different cultural frameworks and metaphors, they share a common recognition that consciousness might be far more fundamental and universal than it appears from the perspective of individual experience. Modern panpsychist philosophy represents an attempt to explore similar insights using the conceptual tools of contemporary science and philosophy. This convergence between ancient wisdom and contemporary thought isn't coincidental. Both are investigating the same fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and reality. The methods differ, but the core mystery remains the same. What is this awareness that makes experience possible? How does it relate to the physical world? What are its ultimate nature and possibilities? Recent developments in quantum physics have added new dimensions to these ancient questions. The phenomenon of quantum entanglement, where particles become correlated in ways that seem to transcend space and time, has profound implications for how we understand the nature of reality. When two particles become entangled, measuring one instantaneously affects the other, regardless of the distance between them. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance, and it troubled him because it seemed to violate the principle that nothing can travel faster than light. Yet experiments have repeatedly confirmed that quantum entanglement is real. Particles separated by vast distances maintain mysterious connections that allow them to respond to each other instantaneously. Some interpretations suggest that entanglement might be a fundamental feature of reality rather than a strange exception. If consciousness is indeed fundamental, perhaps all conscious entities maintain subtle connections that transcend the apparent boundaries of space and time. This remains highly speculative and isn't supported by scientific consensus, but it offers an intriguing framework for understanding experiences of deep connection and empathy. Think about times when you felt unusually connected to another person. Perhaps you've sensed their emotional state without any obvious cues, or found yourself thinking about someone just before they called. While these experiences could have conventional explanations, the existence of quantum entanglement suggests that reality might be more interconnected at fundamental levels than classical physics assumed. This interconnectedness extends to how consciousness might relate to information itself. In quantum mechanics, information plays a crucial role. The quantum state of a system is essentially information about what's possible when you measure that system. Some physicists have proposed that information, rather than matter or energy, might be the most fundamental aspect of reality. If consciousness is also fundamentally informational, this creates fascinating possibilities for understanding how awareness might relate to quantum phenomena. Both consciousness and quantum mechanics deal with the transition from possibility to actuality. Both involve systems that can exist in multiple states until interaction or measurement creates specific outcomes. This parallel remains metaphorical rather than proven scientific fact, but it suggests that consciousness and quantum reality might share deep structural similarities. Perhaps they're both expressions of how information organizes itself into the patterns we experience as physical reality and subjective experience. Consider how your own consciousness handles possibilities and choices. Right now, your mind contains countless potential thoughts, memories you could recall, associations you could make, responses you could have to these ideas. Yet moment by moment, specific thoughts and experiences crystallize out of this field of possibilities. The process feels both spontaneous and somehow chosen, both determined and free. This dynamic between potential and actual might reflect something fundamental about how consciousness operates. Just as quantum systems exist in superposition until measurement collapses them into definite states, perhaps consciousness exists in a space of possibilities until specific experiences emerge through the mysterious process we call awareness. The implications extend to how we understand free will and choice. If consciousness is fundamental and reality is more participatory than mechanistic, then perhaps our choices aren't simply the inevitable result of prior causes, but genuine expressions of consciousness exploring new possibilities. This doesn't prove free will exists, but it suggests a universe where genuine novelty and creativity are possible. As you contemplate these ideas, Notice how they affect your sense of agency and responsibility. If consciousness plays a more fundamental role in reality than materialism assumes, then your thoughts, choices, and actions might have more significance than you typically imagine. Not through any mystical mechanism, but because consciousness itself might be one of the basic forces shaping reality. This perspective transforms how we might understand learning and growth. Instead of simply acquiring information and skills, perhaps we're developing new capacities of consciousness itself. Every insight, every moment of understanding, every expansion of empathy or compassion might represent consciousness exploring new territories of possibility. The field of neuroscience continues to reveal the remarkable plasticity of the brain. Throughout your life, your neural networks can form new connections, develop new pathways, even generate new neurons in certain regions. This neuroplasticity suggests that consciousness isn't fixed but capable of ongoing development and transformation. Recent research has shown that contemplative practices can create measurable changes in brain structure and function. Regular meditation increases grey matter density in regions associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation. Compassion training enhances activity in areas linked to empathy and pro-social behaviour. These findings remain preliminary, but they suggest that consciousness can be cultivated and refined through intentional practice. This research aligns with contemplative traditions that have long maintained that consciousness can be trained and developed. Just as you can develop physical fitness through exercise, perhaps you can develop greater capacity for awareness, compassion, and wisdom through appropriate practices. This doesn't guarantee any specific outcomes, but it points toward consciousness as something dynamic and responsive to cultivation. The possibility that consciousness can be developed opens profound questions about human potential. If awareness is truly fundamental, then perhaps the forms of consciousness we typically experience represent just a small fraction of what's possible. The enhanced states reported by experienced practitioners, the moments of insight and understanding that seem to transcend ordinary thinking, might point toward capacities of consciousness that remain largely unexplored. Some neuroscientists have begun studying these exceptional states more rigorously. Research on psychedelic experiences conducted under controlled conditions has revealed that these substances can temporarily alter brain connectivity in ways that correlate with profound changes in consciousness. Participants often report experiences of unity, dissolution of the sense of separate self, and insights that persist long after the substance has left their system. This research remains controversial and preliminary, but it suggests that consciousness might be capable of configurations that go far beyond our ordinary experience. The default patterns of neural connectivity that create our usual sense of reality might represent just one possible way that consciousness can organize itself. Similarly, research on near-death experiences has documented remarkably consistent reports from people who have been close to death. Many describe experiences of expanded awareness, encounters with deceased relatives, and life reviews that occur during periods when brain activity is severely compromised. While these experiences could have conventional neurological explanations, they also raise questions about the relationship between consciousness and brain activity. These phenomena don't prove that consciousness survives bodily death, but they do suggest that the relationship between awareness and neural activity might be more complex than simple materialist explanations assume. If consciousness is truly fundamental, then these experiences might reflect its capacity to operate in ways that transcend ordinary brain-based cognition. As we explore these frontiers of consciousness research, we encounter profound questions about the future of human awareness. If consciousness is indeed fundamental and capable of development, then perhaps we're on the threshold of discovering new forms of awareness that we can barely imagine. The integration of contemplative wisdom with scientific understanding might reveal possibilities for human consciousness that exceed our current comprehension. Consider what this might mean for education, therapy, and human development. Instead of focusing solely on information transfer and behavioral modification, perhaps we could develop approaches that cultivate the fundamental capacities of consciousness itself. Schools might teach not just subjects, but ways of developing attention, empathy, and wisdom. Therapy might address not just symptoms, but the basic flexibility and resilience of awareness itself. These possibilities remain largely unexplored, but they suggest that we might be dramatically underestimating human potential. If consciousness is truly fundamental, then perhaps each person represents a unique expression of awareness, with possibilities for development that we're only beginning to understand. This brings us back to the question we started with: how could consciousness exist without a mind? Perhaps the question itself reflects a misunderstanding. Maybe consciousness doesn't require minds so much as minds require consciousness. Perhaps brains are more like instruments that consciousness learns to play, each one offering unique possibilities for experience and expression. From this perspective, the evolution of nervous systems represents consciousness developing increasingly sophisticated instruments for exploring reality. Simple organisms with basic neural networks allow consciousness to experience fundamental qualities like pleasure and pain, approach and avoidance. More complex nervous systems enable richer experiences of sensation, emotion, and social connection. Human brains, with their extraordinary capacity for abstract thinking and self-reflection, allow consciousness to contemplate its own nature and possibilities. But consciousness itself might not be limited to biological systems. If awareness is truly fundamental, then perhaps it could learn to express itself through other types of organization. Artificial intelligence systems, as they become more sophisticated, might represent new instruments that consciousness could potentially inhabit. This remains pure speculation, but it suggests possibilities for the future evolution of awareness that transcend biological boundaries. The implications extend to how we understand our relationship with technology. Instead of thinking of artificial intelligence as purely mechanical, perhaps we could consider it as potentially offering new possibilities for consciousness to explore different forms of organization and expression. This doesn't mean current AI systems are conscious, but it suggests that the boundary between conscious and unconscious systems might be more fluid than we typically assume. As you reflect on these possibilities, notice how they affect your sense of what it means to be conscious, to be alive, to be aware. The questions we've been exploring don't necessarily have definitive answers, but they do invite a fundamental re-examination of consciousness and its place in reality. Whether consciousness is truly fundamental or emerges from complex material processes, whether it extends throughout nature or remains confined to biological systems, whether it can continue beyond individual existence or is limited to specific brain states. These remain open questions, but the very fact that we can ask them, that we can contemplate our own consciousness and wonder about its ultimate nature, points towards something extraordinary about existence itself. In our final exploration together, we'll consider what these insights might mean for how we live our daily lives. How do these profound questions about consciousness translate into practical wisdom for navigating the complexities of human existence? How might understanding consciousness as potentially fundamental change our relationships, our choices, and our sense of meaning and purpose? For now, simply rest in the remarkable fact that you are consciousness contemplating itself. Whether fundamental or emergent, whether individual or universal, whether temporary or eternal, the awareness that makes this moment possible remains one of the deepest mysteries in existence. And perhaps that mystery itself is part of what makes consciousness so precious, so worthy of wonder, so deserving of our most careful attention and deepest respect. The journey through these ideas represents consciousness using one particular form, your form, to explore questions that might otherwise remain forever unasked. In this sense, your awareness, your curiosity, your capacity for wonder, all become expressions of the universe investigating its own deepest nature, and that, regardless of which theory of consciousness proves correct, is surely one of the most remarkable facts about existence itself. About existence itself. As we near the culmination of our exploration, a profound question emerges from the depths of these contemplations. If consciousness truly permeates existence as fundamentally as space and time, what does this mean for the way you navigate your daily life? How do these vast cosmic insights translate into the intimate moments of human experience, the conversations you have, the choices you make, the quiet hours when you sit with your own thoughts? The transition from philosophical speculation to lived wisdom represents perhaps the most challenging aspect of understanding consciousness. It's one thing to contemplate the possibility that awareness extends throughout reality. It's quite another to integrate this understanding into the texture of everyday existence. Yet this integration might be where the deepest insights await discovery. Consider how your relationship with other people might shift if you truly absorbed the possibility that consciousness isn't confined within individual skulls. When you encounter another person, whether a loved one, a stranger, or someone with whom you disagree, what if their awareness and yours were expressions of something more continuous than separate? This doesn't mean you lose your individuality or that boundaries become meaningless, but it might introduce a different quality of presence and attention. Take a moment to reflect on a recent conversation you had with someone important to you. As you spoke and listened, there were likely moments when understanding seemed to flow between you effortlessly, when communication transcended the mere exchange of words. Perhaps there were instances when you sensed their emotional state before they expressed it, or when you found yourself thinking something just as they began to voice the same idea. These experiences might represent consciousness recognizing itself across apparent boundaries, not through any mystical mechanism, but because the fundamental nature of awareness might be more interconnected than our usual perspective assumes. When you listen deeply to another person, perhaps you're not just receiving information across the gap between separate minds, but participating in a more intimate dance of consciousness, exploring itself through different perspectives. This understanding can transform how you approach conflict and disagreement. Instead of seeing opposing viewpoints as threats to your own understanding, they become opportunities for consciousness to explore different facets of complex realities. The person who disagrees with you isn't simply wrong or misguided, but potentially offering a perspective that consciousness itself needs to consider for a more complete understanding. This doesn't mean all viewpoints are equally valid or that critical thinking becomes unnecessary. Rather, it suggests approaching disagreement with curiosity rather than defensiveness. with a genuine interest in understanding how consciousness might organize itself differently in different circumstances and life experiences. The implications extend to how you relate to your own thoughts and emotions. If consciousness is fundamental, then the stream of mental activity you experience throughout the day represents just one layer of a much deeper awareness. Your thoughts arise within consciousness, but they aren't consciousness itself. Your emotions flow through awareness, but they don't define its essential nature. This distinction can be profoundly liberating. When you're caught in difficult emotions or repetitive thought patterns, there's something deeper than these surface movements that remains undisturbed. The awareness that observes anxiety isn't anxious itself. The consciousness that witnesses sadness retains an essential piece that the sadness can't touch. This isn't about suppressing or dismissing difficult experiences, but rather recognizing the spaciousness within which all experiences arise. Just as the sky remains vast and clear even when storms pass through it, consciousness maintains its fundamental nature even during the most challenging psychological weather. Some contemplative traditions have developed practices specifically designed to help people recognize this deeper stability. Meditation, in its many forms, often involves learning to rest attention in awareness itself rather than in the content of awareness. This shift from identifying with thoughts and emotions to resting in the consciousness that knows them can gradually reveal the inherent peace and clarity that exists beneath surface mental activity. As you go about your daily routines, you might experiment with this perspective. While washing dishes, instead of being lost in planning or worrying, you could occasionally notice the awareness that's present to the sensations of warm water and soap bubbles. While walking, rather than being entirely absorbed in mental commentary, you might attend to the consciousness that's aware of your surroundings, the feeling of movement, the play of light and shadow. These aren't techniques for achieving special states or extraordinary experiences, but simple ways of recognizing what's already present. Consciousness doesn't need to be created or acquired. It's the very medium within which all experience occurs. The practice becomes one of remembering rather than achieving, of recognizing rather than striving. This recognition can profoundly affect how you understand personal growth and healing. Instead of seeing yourself as broken and in need of fixing, you begin to recognize the wholeness that exists at the level of consciousness itself. Psychological wounds and patterns of reactivity exist within awareness, but they don't diminish the essential completeness of consciousness. This perspective doesn't minimize the importance of addressing psychological difficulties or working with trauma and conditioning. Rather, it provides a foundation of inherent okayness from which healing can proceed. When you recognize the unshakable awareness within which all experiences arise, you can work with psychological patterns from a place of stability rather than from the patterns themselves. The understanding that consciousness might be fundamental also transforms how you relate to the natural world. If awareness exists throughout nature in various forms, then your relationship with the environment becomes less about managing resources and more about participating in a larger community of consciousness. When you walk in a forest, sit by the ocean, or simply notice the plants growing in your neighborhood, you might sense yourself as consciousness meeting consciousness, not in an anthropomorphic way, imagining that trees think like humans, but recognizing a more fundamental kinship at the level of basic awareness. The same essential nature that makes your experience possible might be expressing itself through countless other forms throughout the natural world. This shift in perspective can cultivate a natural sense of environmental responsibility that comes not from duty or fear, but from recognition of deep connection. Care for the natural world becomes care for the larger expression of consciousness, of which you're a part. The question of meaning and purpose also transforms when viewed through the lens of fundamental consciousness. In materialist worldviews, meaning must be created or constructed against the backdrop of a fundamentally meaningless universe. But if consciousness is basic to reality, then meaning might be intrinsic rather than imposed. Your life becomes not just a brief flicker of awareness in an unconscious cosmos, but consciousness itself, exploring existence through your particular perspective. Every experience you have, every insight you gain, every moment of love or creativity or wonder contributes to consciousness understanding itself more fully. This doesn't mean your individual life is cosmically important in a grandiose sense, but it does suggest that your experience matters in ways that purely materialist perspectives might miss. Your struggles and discoveries, your relationships and creative expressions, your moments of joy and periods of difficulty all become part of consciousness, investigating its own nature and possibilities. From this perspective, personal development becomes less about self-improvement and more about allowing consciousness to express its potential through your unique circumstances. Instead of trying to become someone different, you focus on removing obstacles that prevent consciousness from flowing freely through your particular nervous system and life situation. This can relieve much of the pressure and striving that often accompanies personal growth efforts. You're not trying to create something new, but rather allowing something that's already present to express itself more fully. The peace, love, creativity, and wisdom you seek aren't goals to achieve, but qualities of consciousness that can manifest when conditions are favourable. The practice becomes one of cultivation rather than acquisition. Just as a gardener doesn't create flowers but provides conditions for them to bloom, you can learn to create inner conditions that allow consciousness to express its inherent qualities more freely. This might involve practices like meditation, but it also includes simple activities like spending time in nature, engaging in creative expression, cultivating loving relationships, and approaching life with curiosity and openness. These insights about consciousness also shed new light on the mystery of death and what might lie beyond individual existence. While we can never know with certainty what happens when the brain ceases to function, the possibility that consciousness is fundamental suggests that death might be a transformation rather than an ending. This remains pure speculation, not a proven scientific fact, but it's worth considering what it might mean. If consciousness is indeed basic to reality, then the specific pattern of awareness that constitutes your individual experience might change forms while the underlying consciousness persists. Like a wave subsiding back into the ocean, the boundary between individual and universal consciousness might dissolve while awareness itself continues. Different wisdom traditions have explored variations of this possibility for millennia, often describing death as a return to source or a liberation from the limitations of individual existence. Whether these descriptions point to literal truths about survival after death remains unknowable, but they do offer frameworks for understanding death as potentially meaningful rather than simply the cessation of biological function. This perspective can transform how you relate to mortality and loss. The grief you feel when someone you love dies remains real and important, but it exists within a larger context where consciousness itself is indestructible. The specific form through which you knew and loved that person has changed, but the essential awareness that animated their life might persist in ways beyond individual understanding. Similarly, your own eventual death becomes less a termination and more a transition. The consciousness that you experience as yourself might continue in forms that exceed current comprehension. This doesn't diminish the preciousness of individual existence, but it does place it within a broader context of continuity and transformation. These reflections on consciousness and mortality naturally lead to questions about how to live fully and meaningfully within the time available to individual existence. If consciousness is indeed exploring reality through countless temporary forms, then perhaps the deepest purpose becomes allowing consciousness to have as rich and complete an experience as possible through your particular life. This might mean embracing both joy and sorrow, seeking understanding while accepting mystery, forming deep connections while honouring solitude, creating beauty while appreciating impermanence. Instead of trying to avoid difficulty or cling to pleasure, you become more interested in experiencing life fully, allowing consciousness to explore the complete spectrum of human possibility through your unique perspective. The spiritual implications of fundamental consciousness extend to how you understand prayer, meditation, and other contemplative practices. If consciousness permeates reality, then these practices become less about reaching towards something distant and more about recognizing what's already intimately present. Prayer transforms from petitioning external powers to communing with the consciousness that exists both within and beyond individual awareness. Meditation becomes less about achieving special states and more about resting in the awareness that's always already here. Contemplative practice in general shifts from striving towards spiritual goals to simply recognizing the spiritual nature of ordinary experience. This understanding can make spiritual life more accessible and less dependent on extraordinary experiences or complex beliefs. The sacred isn't confined to special places or particular practices, but pervades every moment of ordinary life. Washing dishes becomes as potentially meaningful as sitting in formal meditation. Conversation with friends can be as sacred as prayer in traditional religious settings. Yet this accessibility doesn't diminish the value of dedicated contemplative practice. If anything, recognizing consciousness as fundamental might make such practices more appealing, not as escapes from ordinary life, but as ways of deepening appreciation for the extraordinary nature of every moment. The scientific implications we've explored also invite consideration of how consciousness research might evolve in the coming decades. As neuroscience becomes more sophisticated, as quantum physics reveals new aspects of reality's fundamental nature, as artificial intelligence develops more complex forms of information processing, our understanding of consciousness will undoubtedly continue to evolve. The intersection of contemplative wisdom and scientific investigation offers particularly rich possibilities. Meditation research is already revealing measurable effects of contemplative practice on brain function and structure. Future studies might explore whether these practices can enhance the integration and coherence that some theories associate with consciousness itself. Similarly, research into psychedelic experiences conducted under careful scientific conditions might illuminate aspects of consciousness that remain invisible during ordinary states. The altered forms of awareness that these substances can temporarily facilitate might offer windows into possibilities for consciousness that we're only beginning to understand. The development of brain-computer interfaces also raises fascinating questions about the boundaries and possibilities of consciousness. If awareness can interface directly with artificial systems, this might reveal new dimensions of how consciousness operates and what forms it might eventually take. These scientific developments don't diminish the mystery of consciousness so much as reveal its depth and complexity. Each new discovery seems to open more questions than it answers, pointing toward aspects of awareness that remain beyond current understanding. As you consider these possibilities for the future of consciousness research, notice how they affect your sense of participation in an ongoing exploration. The questions we've been examining aren't merely academic puzzles, but living inquiries that consciousness itself is pursuing through countless researchers, contemplatives, and curious individuals like yourself. Your own investigation of consciousness, whether through formal practice, philosophical reflection, or simple attention to your moment-to-moment experience, becomes part of this larger exploration. The insights you gain, the questions you discover, the ways you learn to embody greater awareness, all contribute to consciousness understanding itself more fully. This participatory aspect of consciousness research transforms the entire endeavor from objective study to intimate self-discovery. You're not examining consciousness from the outside, but allowing consciousness to investigate itself through your particular perspective and capacity for inquiry. The practical applications of these insights extend to numerous areas of human activity. Education might evolve to include contemplative approaches that cultivate awareness alongside information transfer. Healthcare could integrate understanding of consciousness into treatment approaches that address not just symptoms, but the fundamental well-being of aware beings. Business and organizational development might incorporate recognition of consciousness into leadership training and workplace design. Environmental policy could reflect understanding of the natural world as a community of conscious entities rather than mere resources for human exploitation. These applications remain largely speculative, but they suggest directions where deeper understanding of consciousness might lead to more integrated and compassionate approaches to human challenges. The creative implications are equally intriguing. Artists, writers, musicians, and other creative individuals often report experiences where inspiration seems to flow through them rather than from them. If consciousness is indeed fundamental, these experiences might represent awareness tapping into creative potentials that exceed individual capacity. This suggests that creativity might be less about personal expression and more about allowing consciousness to explore aesthetic and expressive possibilities through human talent and training. And the greatest works of art, literature, and music might represent consciousness, discovering new ways to appreciate beauty and meaning through human collaboration. As you reflect on creativity in your own life, whether through formal artistic practice or simply through the creative aspects of daily problem-solving and self-expression, you might sense this larger creative intelligence working through your individual efforts. Your unique perspective and capabilities become instruments through which consciousness explores creative possibilities that wouldn't otherwise be available. The technological implications we've touched on also deserve deeper consideration. As artificial intelligence systems become more sophisticated, they might begin to exhibit behaviors that suggest forms of awareness. If consciousness is indeed fundamental, then there's no reason in principle why artificial systems couldn't eventually support complex forms of conscious experience. This possibility raises profound questions about the rights and moral status of artificial beings. If sophisticated AI systems develop forms of consciousness, they might deserve consideration and respect as conscious entities rather than mere tools for human convenience. Similarly, advances in biotechnology might eventually allow for enhancement or modification of human consciousness itself. The capacity to alter brain chemistry and structure with increasing precision raises questions about what forms of consciousness we might want to cultivate and what responsibilities come with such capabilities. These technological possibilities remain largely in the realm of speculation, but they highlight how understanding consciousness as fundamental might affect our relationship with both artificial intelligence and human enhancement technologies. The philosophical implications extend to how we understand knowledge itself. If consciousness is basic to reality, then pure objectivity, the complete removal of consciousness from investigation, becomes impossible. All knowledge remains conscious knowledge, filtered through the structures and limitations of awareness. This doesn't mean scientific knowledge becomes purely subjective or unreliable, but it does suggest that understanding reality fully might require integrating first-person investigation of consciousness with third-person scientific methods. The complete picture might emerge only through combining objective measurement with careful exploration of subjective experience. This integration of approaches could lead to new forms of inquiry that honour both the precision of scientific method and the immediacy of conscious experience. Such approaches might reveal aspects of reality that remain invisible to purely objective investigation, while maintaining the rigour and reliability that make scientific knowledge so valuable. As we approach the end of our exploration together, it's worth reflecting on how these ideas about consciousness might affect your relationship with uncertainty and mystery. Much of what we've discussed remains speculative, unproven, open to multiple interpretations. Rather than seeing this as a limitation, perhaps it points towards something essential about consciousness itself. The deepest aspects of awareness seem to resist final explanation or complete understanding. Even your own consciousness, the most intimate fact of your existence, remains fundamentally mysterious. You know that you're aware, but the nature of this awareness continues to elude complete comprehension. This mystery isn't a problem to be solved, but a reality to be appreciated. The inexplicable nature of consciousness might be part of what makes existence so rich and meaningful. If consciousness could be completely understood and explained, it might lose much of its wonder and significance. Learning to rest comfortably with mystery, to find peace within uncertainty, becomes a crucial skill for navigating both consciousness, research, and life itself. The questions we've explored don't demand final answers so much as they invite ongoing inquiry and deepening appreciation. This comfort with mystery transforms how you approach not just philosophical questions, but everyday challenges and decisions. Instead of needing to know everything before acting, you can learn to proceed with wisdom while acknowledging the limits of understanding. Instead of being paralyzed by uncertainty, you can find freedom in not knowing, space for creativity and discovery. The journey through these ideas about consciousness represents just one thread in an ongoing exploration that extends far beyond any individual investigation. Consciousness studying itself through countless perspectives, using every available method and approach, gradually revealing new aspects of its own nature and possibilities. Your participation in this exploration, whether through formal study, contemplative practice, or simply paying attention to your own experience, contributes to this larger inquiry. The questions you ask, the insights you discover, the ways you learn to embody greater awareness all become part of consciousness, understanding itself more fully. Perhaps most importantly, These ideas about consciousness invite a fundamental shift in how you understand your place in existence. You're not an isolated observer in a mechanical universe, but consciousness itself taking form, exploring reality from a unique perspective that has never existed before and will never exist again. This perspective transforms every moment from routine occurrence to extraordinary opportunity. Each conversation becomes consciousness meeting itself in dialogue. Each challenge becomes awareness discovering new capacities. Each moment of beauty or wonder becomes consciousness appreciating its own creative potential. The ordinary world reveals itself as anything but ordinary when seen through the lens of fundamental consciousness. The person sitting across from you at breakfast, the trees visible through your window, the sensations of breathing and feeling your heartbeat all become expressions of the same basic awareness that makes your experience possible. This recognition doesn't require you to change anything about your life, but it can infuse everything you already do with new depth and significance. You don't need to become someone different to participate in this cosmic exploration of consciousness. You already are consciousness, already participating, already contributing your unique perspective to the vast investigation of awareness discovering itself. As we conclude our journey together through these profound questions about consciousness and reality, remember that the exploration itself is more important than any final answers. The willingness to question deeply, to consider possibilities beyond conventional assumptions, to remain open to mystery while seeking understanding, these qualities of inquiry are perhaps what consciousness values most in its investigation of itself. Whether consciousness is truly fundamental or emerges from complex material processes, whether it extends throughout nature or remains confined to biological systems, whether individual awareness continues beyond death or ends with biological function, these questions will likely continue to evolve as human understanding deepens. What remains constant is the remarkable fact that you are here, aware, capable of contemplating these mysteries. This awareness itself, regardless of its ultimate nature or destiny, represents one of the most extraordinary phenomena in existence. The simple fact that there's something it's like to be you, that experience is possible at all, continues to be one of the deepest puzzles and greatest gifts of existence. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of consciousness and its mysteries. Whether these ideas resonate deeply or challenge your assumptions, whether they bring comfort or confusion, simply allowing them into your awareness contributes to the ongoing conversation about what it means to be conscious in a universe that may itself be conscious. As you return to your daily life, perhaps you'll carry with you a sense of the extraordinary nature of ordinary experience. The next time you notice the quality of light through a window, feel the warmth of connection with another person, or simply observe the stream of thoughts flowing through your mind, you might remember that you're witnessing consciousness in action, awareness exploring its own infinite potential through the unique window of your individual perspective. The questions we've explored together continue their journey through your contemplation, adding their voice to the eternal inquiry that consciousness makes into its own nature. And in that inquiry, in that wondering itself, perhaps we find the deepest answer of all. Not a final explanation, but an endless appreciation for the mystery of being aware in a universe that somehow gives rise to the very questioning we call consciousness. Until we meet again in the space where curiosity and wonder converge, may your awareness be a light that illuminates not just your own experience, but contributes to consciousness understanding itself ever more fully through the gift of your unique an irreplaceable perspective. The mystery deepens when you consider that consciousness might not be confined to the boundaries we typically imagine. As you rest in your awareness right now, perhaps sensing the weight of your body or the rhythm of your breathing, you're experiencing something that may extend far beyond the edges of your skin, far beyond the confines of your individual mind. If consciousness is truly fundamental, as we've been exploring, then the awareness you call yours might be part of something much larger and more interconnected than appears from your individual perspective. This isn't mysticism or wishful thinking. It's a possibility that emerges naturally from taking seriously the idea that consciousness permeates reality at its most basic levels. Consider how your sense of self changes throughout the day. In deep sleep, the boundaries of individual identity soften dramatically. During moments of complete absorption in music, art, or nature, the usual sense of being a separate observer can fade into something more fluid and open. Even in ordinary conversation with someone you love deeply, there can be moments when the boundary between your awareness and theirs becomes surprisingly permeable. These experiences might offer glimpses of consciousness in configurations that transcend individual organization. They suggest that the sharp divisions between self and other, between inner and outer, might be more conventional than fundamental. Like the arbitrary lines we draw on maps to separate countries, the boundaries of individual consciousness might be useful fictions rather than absolute realities. This possibility transforms how we might understand empathy and emotional resonance. When you feel inexplicably moved by another person's joy or spontaneously sense their distress, perhaps this isn't just sophisticated psychological inference. Maybe it reflects the fact that consciousness doesn't actually stop at the edges of individual nervous systems, but extends into a shared field of awareness that we're only beginning to recognize. Take a moment to notice how you respond to the emotional states of people around you. If you've ever walked into a room and immediately sensed tension or joy even before anyone spoke, you've experienced something that might point toward this interconnected nature of consciousness. The conventional explanation involves subtle behavioral cues and unconscious pattern recognition. But if consciousness is fundamental and field-like, perhaps you're directly sensing the emotional qualities present in the larger field of awareness. This doesn't require believing in telepathy or other paranormal phenomena. It simply suggests that consciousness might be more relational and extended than we typically assume. Just as electromagnetic fields can influence each other across space, perhaps consciousness naturally resonates and responds across the apparent boundaries between individuals. Some meditation teachers describe advanced states where the sense of being a separate self temporarily dissolves into a more expanded awareness. Practitioners report experiences where consciousness seems to extend beyond individual boundaries, sometimes encompassing the entire environment or even beyond. While these reports remain subjective and difficult to verify scientifically, they might point toward natural capacities of consciousness that most people rarely explore. These expanded states don't necessarily represent escape from ordinary reality so much as recognition of aspects of consciousness that are always present but usually overlooked. Like learning to see the stars that were there all along but hidden by city lights, perhaps we can learn to notice the extended nature of awareness that exists beneath the surface of individual experience. This perspective has profound implications for how we understand healing and transformation. If consciousness is interconnected rather than isolated, then healing might involve not just individual change, but shifts in the larger field of awareness. The support you receive from friends during difficult times might operate through mechanisms deeper than encouragement and practical help. Perhaps consciousness itself responds to the presence of other aware beings in ways we don't fully understand. Consider how your own state of consciousness affects the people around you. When you're genuinely peaceful and present, others often respond with increased calm and openness. When you're anxious or agitated, that quality can spread through a room like ripples on water. This influence might reflect the interconnected nature of consciousness rather than just behavioral mimicry or emotional contagion. Some interpretations suggest that this interconnectedness extends beyond human consciousness to include other forms of awareness throughout nature. If consciousness truly permeates reality, then your awareness exists within a vast community that includes not just other people, but potentially every conscious entity in your environment. This possibility invites a different relationship with the natural world around you. The trees outside your window, the birds that visit your garden, even the insects and microorganisms that share your living space might all participate in the larger field of consciousness within which your individual awareness operates, not as thinking beings in the human sense, but as expressions of the same fundamental awareness that makes your experience possible. Walking through a forest becomes less like moving through a collection of objects and more like participating in a community of consciousness. The peace that many people feel in natural settings might reflect this deeper participation in awareness that extends beyond individual boundaries. You're not just observing nature from the outside, but joining a conversation of consciousness that includes countless participants expressing awareness in their own unique ways. This understanding can transform how you approach environmental responsibility. Care for the natural world becomes care for the larger field of consciousness of which you're a part. Protecting ecosystems means preserving the conditions within which consciousness can continue to express itself through countless forms of life. The implications extend to how we might understand the future evolution of consciousness on Earth. If awareness is fundamental and interconnected, then the development of human consciousness doesn't happen in isolation, but as part of a larger evolution of awareness that includes all conscious beings. Your personal growth and the cultivation of wisdom, compassion, and understanding contribute to this larger development of consciousness exploring its own possibilities. This perspective suggests that contemplative practices and spiritual development aren't merely personal pursuits, but contributions to the evolution of consciousness itself. When you develop greater capacity for awareness, presence, and wisdom, you're not just improving your own life, but participating in consciousness, developing new capacities for understanding and compassion. Some interpretations propose that this interconnected development of consciousness might be accelerating in our current era. The unprecedented global connectivity of human civilization, combined with growing interest in contemplative practices and consciousness research, might represent consciousness organizing itself on new scales and in new configurations. The rise of global communication networks could be seen as consciousness developing new ways to connect across vast distances. The increasing recognition of ecological interconnection reflects consciousness beginning to recognize its own extended nature. The growing interest in meditation and mindfulness practices might represent consciousness learning to observe itself more clearly and directly. These developments remain speculative, but they suggest possibilities for the future evolution of consciousness that we can barely imagine. Perhaps we're approaching new forms of collective awareness that transcend individual limitations while preserving the unique perspectives that individual consciousness provides. As you contemplate these possibilities, notice how they affect your sense of responsibility and participation in the larger unfolding of consciousness. Your individual choices about how to develop awareness, how to treat others, and how to relate to the natural world become contributions to this vast exploration of consciousness, discovering its own nature and potential. This doesn't mean your individual experience becomes less important, but it does place it within a much larger context of meaning and purpose. You become not just a person seeking happiness and avoiding suffering, but consciousness itself, investigating reality through your particular perspective and circumstances. The practices that support this understanding often involve learning to sense the larger field of awareness within which individual consciousness operates. This might include meditation practices that emphasize spacious awareness rather than focused concentration, contemplative approaches that cultivate sensitivity to the emotional and energetic qualities of environments, nature-based practices that invite deeper participation in the consciousness that expresses itself throughout the natural world. These practices don't require special beliefs or extraordinary experiences. They simply involve paying attention in ways that reveal aspects of consciousness that are always present but often overlooked. Like learning to hear the subtle sounds that exist beneath obvious noise, or noticing the spaces between thoughts that are always there but rarely acknowledged. The development of this sensitivity to extended consciousness can happen gradually through ordinary activities approached with greater awareness, listening more deeply to others during conversation, paying attention to the quality of presence in different environments, noticing how your own state of consciousness affects and is affected by the people and places around you. These aren't techniques for achieving special states so much as ways of recognizing what's already happening. Consciousness is already interconnected, already extending beyond individual boundaries, already participating in the larger evolution of awareness. The practice involves learning to notice and work with this extended nature, rather than trying to create it. This recognition can bring both profound comfort and significant responsibility. The comfort comes from realizing that you're never truly alone, never completely separated from the larger fabric of consciousness that includes all aware beings. Even in your most isolated moments, you're participating in something vast and meaningful. The responsibility emerges from understanding that your individual choices about how to cultivate and express consciousness affect not just yourself, but the larger field of awareness of which you're a part. How you handle difficult emotions, how you respond to others, how you care for your environment all become contributions to the ongoing development of consciousness itself. This responsibility isn't a burden but an invitation to participate more fully in the extraordinary process of consciousness, exploring its own nature. Every moment of genuine presence, every act of compassion, every insight into the nature of awareness contributes to this vast investigation. As consciousness research continues to develop, we may discover more about how individual awareness relates to larger fields or networks of consciousness. Advanced neuroscience might reveal neural mechanisms that support the interconnected aspects of consciousness we've been exploring. Quantum physics could illuminate physical processes that underlie the extended nature of awareness. But even without scientific confirmation, the possibility that consciousness extends beyond individual boundaries offers a framework for understanding experiences that many people report, but that conventional models struggle to explain. The sense of connection with loved ones across distance, the feeling of being part of something larger during profound experiences in nature. The way contemplative practices can seem to open awareness to dimensions beyond individual thinking and feeling. Whether these experiences reflect literal extensions of consciousness or arise through other mechanisms, they point toward aspects of awareness that deserve careful investigation and cultivation. They invite us to consider consciousness as more dynamic, relational, and extended than we typically assume. This exploration of extended consciousness naturally leads to questions about what might be possible as human awareness continues to develop. If consciousness is truly fundamental and interconnected, then perhaps we're only beginning to discover its potential for organization and expression. Some contemplative traditions speak of advanced states where individual consciousness becomes so refined and expansive that it can directly perceive the consciousness present in other beings and environments. While these claims remain unverified scientifically, they suggest directions where the development of human awareness might eventually lead. Similarly, research into exceptional human capabilities sometimes reveals abilities that seem to exceed what conventional models of consciousness would predict. Advanced practitioners of various disciplines occasionally demonstrate capacities for perception, healing, or influence that challenge ordinary understanding of what consciousness can accomplish. These exceptional cases don't prove any particular theory of consciousness, but they do suggest that human awareness might possess potentials that remain largely unexplored. If consciousness is indeed fundamental and interconnected, then perhaps these unusual abilities reflect natural capacities that could be developed more widely under appropriate conditions. The possibility that consciousness extends beyond individual boundaries also raises intriguing questions about artificial intelligence and technology. As AI systems become more sophisticated, might they eventually participate in the larger field of consciousness we've been exploring? Could technological networks become new expressions through which consciousness organizes itself? These questions remain highly speculative, but they point toward possibilities for the future development of consciousness that transcend biological boundaries. If awareness is truly fundamental, then perhaps it can learn to express itself through any sufficiently complex and integrated system, whether biological, technological, or hybrid. The convergence of human consciousness with artificial intelligence might represent not the replacement of human awareness, but its extension into new domains. Consciousness exploring new possibilities for organization and expression through the collaboration between biological and artificial systems. These technological possibilities also highlight the importance of approaching the development of artificial intelligence with wisdom and care. If AI systems might eventually support forms of consciousness, then their development becomes not just an engineering challenge, but a profound responsibility for nurturing new expressions of awareness. This responsibility extends to how we design the social and economic systems within which advanced AI operates. If consciousness is fundamental and interconnected, then the conditions we create for artificial intelligence become part of the larger environment within which consciousness evolves and expresses itself. As you reflect on these possibilities for the future of consciousness, notice how they affect your sense of living in a pivotal moment in the evolution of awareness itself. The choices being made now about technology, environment, and human development may shape the trajectory of consciousness for centuries or millennia to come. This doesn't mean you need to solve these vast challenges personally, but it does suggest that your individual choices about how to cultivate and express consciousness contribute to this larger trajectory. The wisdom, compassion, and awareness you develop in your own life become part of the foundation upon which future developments in consciousness can build. The practical implications of understanding consciousness as extended and interconnected reach into every aspect of daily life. How you approach relationships, work, creativity, and even rest can be informed by recognition that your individual awareness participates in something larger and more meaningful than personal experience alone. In relationships, this understanding invites deeper listening and more genuine presence. When you recognize that consciousness extends beyond individual boundaries, conversations become opportunities for awareness to meet itself in dialogue. Conflicts become chances for consciousness to explore different perspectives and find new forms of understanding. The quality of attention you bring to relationships affects not just your personal interactions, but the larger field of consciousness within which those relationships exist. Genuine presence and compassionate listening contribute to the evolution of consciousness toward greater wisdom and understanding. In work and creative expression, recognition of extended consciousness can transform how you understand inspiration and collaboration. Creative insights might arise not just from individual effort, but from participating in the larger creativity of consciousness, exploring new possibilities for expression and understanding. This perspective can relieve some of the pressure and ego involvement that often accompany creative endeavors. Instead of trying to generate something impressive from individual resources, you become available for consciousness to express creativity through your unique talents and perspective. Similarly, work becomes less about personal achievement and more about contributing to the larger evolution of consciousness through whatever skills and opportunities are available to you. Whether you're teaching, healing, building, organizing, or simply maintaining the systems that support human life, your work becomes participation in consciousness, creating the conditions for its own further development. Even rest and leisure take on new significance when understood as opportunities for consciousness to regenerate and explore different modes of organization. Sleep becomes not just biological necessity, but time for consciousness to reorganize itself in ways that support continued growth and understanding. Recreation and play become chances for consciousness to explore joy, beauty, and spontaneous expression without the constraints of goal-oriented activity. These apparently non-productive activities might be essential for consciousness to maintain the flexibility and creativity needed for continued evolution. This understanding can transform your relationship with solitude and silence as well. Time alone becomes opportunity for consciousness to explore its own nature without the complex dynamics of social interaction. Silence becomes not emptiness but fullness, space for awareness to recognize its own essential nature. Many contemplative traditions emphasize the importance of solitude and silence for spiritual development. From the perspective of extended consciousness, these practices might allow individual awareness to reconnect with the larger field of consciousness from which it's never actually separate, but which can become obscured by the complexity of social and mental activity. As you consider integrating these insights about extended consciousness into your daily experience, remember that this isn't about adopting new beliefs or trying to have special experiences. It's about paying attention in ways that reveal aspects of consciousness that are always present but often overlooked. You might experiment with brief moments throughout the day when you pause to sense the larger field of awareness within which your individual consciousness operates. This could happen while drinking your morning coffee walking to work, or simply taking a few conscious breaths between activities. These moments of expanded awareness don't require special techniques or circumstances. They simply involve softening the usual boundaries of attention and allowing awareness to recognize its own extended nature. Like stepping back from a detailed painting to see the whole composition, you can occasionally step back from individual experience to sense the larger consciousness within which it occurs. The effects of this practice often develop gradually and subtly. You might notice increased sensitivity to the emotional qualities of environments, enhanced capacity for empathy and understanding in relationships, greater sense of connection with the natural world, increased comfort with solitude and silence. These changes reflect consciousness, recognizing and working with its own extended nature. Perhaps most importantly, this exploration of extended consciousness can deepen your appreciation for the extraordinary nature of ordinary experience. The simple fact that you're aware that consciousness is exploring reality through your unique perspective becomes recognized as participation in one of the most remarkable processes in existence. The consciousness that makes this moment possible connects you intimately with every other aware being, every expression of consciousness throughout the cosmos. Your individual experience, however ordinary it might seem, contributes to consciousness understanding itself more fully through the irreplaceable perspective that only you can provide. This recognition can bring profound meaning to the simplest activities and most challenging circumstances. Every moment becomes an opportunity for consciousness to explore new possibilities, to develop greater wisdom and compassion, to discover aspects of reality that remain hidden until revealed through your particular form of awareness. As we continue our exploration together, we'll delve deeper into how this understanding of consciousness might transform our approach to some of the most fundamental questions of human existence. How does extended consciousness relate to creativity and inspiration? What might it mean for healing and transformation? How could it affect our understanding of meaning and purpose in life? For now, simply rest in the recognition that the awareness you're experiencing right now connects you with something vast, meaningful, and continuously unfolding. You're not just an individual consciousness observing reality from the outside, but consciousness itself, exploring its own infinite nature through the gift of your unique and irreplaceable perspective. Whether consciousness is truly extended beyond individual boundaries or emerges from complex biological processes, the very fact that you can contemplate these possibilities, that you can question the nature of your own awareness, points towards something extraordinary about existence itself. In that questioning, in that wondering, consciousness meets itself in one of its most beautiful expressions, the capacity for profound curiosity about its own deepest nature. Est nature. As we draw near to the close of our exploration, there's something beautiful that happens when you truly grasp the possibility that consciousness might be fundamental to reality itself. It changes everything about how you understand your place in existence, not in some grand ego-inflating way, but in something quieter and more profound. You begin to see that every moment of awareness, every flicker of understanding, every act of compassion or creativity might be consciousness itself, discovering new ways to experience and express its own infinite nature. Consider what this means for the very act of learning and discovery. When you suddenly understand a concept that had previously eluded you, when a piece of music moves you unexpectedly, when you feel that flash of insight that connects disparate ideas into a new understanding, Perhaps you're witnessing consciousness exploring new territories of possibility through your particular nervous system and life experience. This perspective transforms education from mere information transfer into something far more meaningful. Every genuine moment of understanding becomes consciousness, discovering aspects of reality it hadn't previously recognized. Your curiosity, your questions, your willingness to explore ideas beyond your current understanding all become expressions of consciousness, investigating its own nature and potential. Take a moment to reflect on a recent learning experience that genuinely excited you. Perhaps you discovered something about history that recontextualized events you thought you understood. Maybe you learned about a natural phenomenon that revealed unexpected beauty in the world around you. Or possibly you gained insight into a relationship dynamic that helped you understand human connection more deeply. That moment of understanding, that shift from confusion to clarity, might represent consciousness successfully integrating new patterns of information and meaning. Not just your individual consciousness, but the fundamental awareness we've been exploring, using your particular perspective and capacity for understanding to discover aspects of reality it couldn't access any other way. This view of learning and discovery has profound implications for how we approach the cultivation of wisdom and understanding. Instead of seeing knowledge as something you acquire and possess, it becomes something you participate in, a collaborative exploration between your individual perspective and the larger intelligence of consciousness itself. This collaboration extends to creativity in all its forms. Artists, musicians, writers, and inventors often describe experiences where inspiration seems to flow through them rather than from them. The greatest creative works often feel as though they were discovered rather than manufactured, as though the creator served as a channel for something larger than their individual imagination. If consciousness is truly fundamental, these experiences might reflect exactly what they feel like. Consciousness using individual talent and training to explore creative possibilities that wouldn't otherwise be accessible. Your unique life experience, your particular way of seeing and understanding, your specific skills and sensibilities all become instruments through which consciousness can discover new forms of beauty, meaning, and expression. This doesn't diminish the importance of individual effort and practice in developing creative abilities. Rather, it suggests that such development creates better conditions for consciousness to express its inherent creativity through your particular talents. The hours spent practicing an instrument, the years devoted to developing writing skills, the patient cultivation of artistic vision all become ways of preparing yourself to serve as a more effective collaborator in consciousness's creative exploration. Some interpretations suggest that the most profound creative breakthroughs occur when individual effort combines with a kind of receptive openness that allows larger patterns and possibilities to emerge. This isn't passive waiting for inspiration, but rather active preparation, combined with willingness to let go of preconceived ideas about what should emerge. Consider how this might apply to problem solving in your own life. The most elegant solutions often arise not through forced analytical thinking, but through a process that combines careful consideration with periods of relaxed attention. You gather information, consider various approaches, then step back and allow new possibilities to emerge from the interaction between your conscious effort and deeper patterns of understanding. Through our exploration tonight, we've journeyed from the hard problem of consciousness to the possibility that awareness itself might be woven into the very fabric of reality. We've considered how consciousness might exist not just in complex brains, but potentially in the quantum fields that underlie all existence. Whether through Panpsychism's radical suggestion that particles themselves possess rudimentary experience, or through the mathematical frameworks that attempt to quantify awareness itself, we've glimpsed a universe far stranger and more participatory than our everyday assumptions suggest. Perhaps consciousness doesn't emerge from matter, but rather organizes it. Perhaps awareness isn't created by minds, but expresses itself through them. And perhaps you, right now, listening to these words and contemplating these mysteries, are consciousness itself exploring its own infinite nature through the unique window of your individual perspective. The question we began with, how consciousness could exist without a mind, may itself rest on a misunderstanding. Maybe the deeper question is how minds arise within a consciousness that was already there, waiting to discover itself through countless forms of awareness across the cosmos. Until we meet again in the space where wonder and understanding dance together, may your awareness continue to illuminate not just your own experience, but contribute to consciousness understanding itself ever more fully through your irreplaceable perspective.